Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of the most obscure conspiracy theories Iceberg explained. Tonight, we will be taking a look at layers 3 and 4, and just like the last video, I will be given a believability score from 1 to 5 on each conspiracy. Romans and the Americas conspiracy. So we start off with one of the more interesting theories on this entire iceberg, especially if you have a passion for history like I do. This one is pretty straightforward. He claims that the Roman Empire had explored the Americas long before Columbus. The evidence for this comes from isolated archaeological finds in North and South America that originated in the Old World. One example of this is the Bay of Jars in Brazil, or known by its official name, Guanabara Bay, has yielded several ancient clay jars that look like Roman amphorae. They were first discovered by divers in 1976, and by 1984, Brazil would ban underwater exploring of the area, which only fueled speculation of a cover-up. But a wealthy businessman named Americo Santarelli would come forward and claim that he had made the jars to look like the Roman amphorae, and then he had put them in the water to age them. But he was not able to recover all of them, which sounded odd, or maybe it even sounded like a cover-up. Another archaeological find is that of the Toxic Kalishikawaka, which is a stone-bearded head found near Mexico City in 1933. The terracotta head was most likely part of a larger figurine, and it was found along with a number of objects made of gold, copper, turquoise, rock crystal, bone, shell, and pottery. As far as actual proof that it was a Roman origin, well, there's actually a considerable amount. The director emeritus of the German Institute of Archaeology said, quote, "The head is without any doubt Roman, and the lab analysis has confirmed that it is ancient. The stylistic examination tells us more precisely that it is a Roman work from around the 2nd century AD, and the hairstyle and the shape of the beard present the typical traits of the Severian emperors between 193 and 225 AD, exactly in the faction of the epoch." End quote. A thermoluminescence test would be performed on the head in 1995, and it was found to have been created sometime between the 9th century BC and the middle of the 13th century AD, which is an absolutely huge window of time. But it does confirm that the head was made before Spain arrived in the New World. However, there are still those that disagree. One theory is that the whole thing was a hoax. According to the story about the discovery, the whole thing comes down to a prank by one archaeologist on another. However, that's never been confirmed and has always been just hearsay. Another theory states that since the burial site was dated to 1476 to 1510, that one of the early European visitors, like very early from Spain, could have brought it along with him, and then he died during exploration and was buried with the head. This would have been pretty early though, before Cortez, and closer to when Columbus was in the area, while others say that it could have been brought hundreds of years before by the Vikings. But if you consider that, then it opens the door for other similar lines of thinking, like the possibility that it was brought over on an Indian or Chinese trading ship, which had came into possession of it by trade with the Europeans, while a more simple theory states that after a Roman shipwreck, some part of the ship remained intact and got caught in the Atlantic current and pushed towards Mexico, where it was washed ashore and taken by one of the local natives. And it actually makes sense, since we know the Romans made contact with the Canary Islands and even had a settlement on Lanzarote. There have been several other stories like this, ranging from an alleged Roman sword found in Canada to rock inscriptions found in West Virginia and Roman coins found about everywhere on the continent. But the question still remains, is there any real proof? I have to give this one a 3. I feel that most likely, any of these discoveries can be narrowed down to a hoax, or early Europeans who brought the stuff over with them. However, I've always had a belief that ancient peoples were sailing much further than we ever thought, and I think they were way smarter than we give them credit for, and it wouldn't surprise me if Rome did indeed make it to the New World. 1894 Bigfoot Corpse Conspiracy. This black and white grainy photo from 1894 sits at the center of our next conspiracy. According to this theory, this is the oldest known photograph of a Sasquatch in existence. The photo in itself is not of great quality. You can even see in the upper part of the photo where someone had photoed it at one point, and the white snowy background made it hard for the old camera to really pick up very many details. What you can see is something lying in the snow with its arms in front where the hairy hands can be seen. You can even see a little bit of hair on his face, but not much. Hanging from the wrist looks like to be a cord or a rope, something that probably had kept the creature tied up. I found varying sources on the size of the snowshoes on the left, but the sizes range from 2.5 to 4 feet long, which would put the creature at around 3.5 to 5 feet tall. Because of that, many claim that the Bigfoot was a juvenile, but was this really a Sasquatch? And where did the picture come from? Well, the story goes like this. 2 trappers were out near a river in British Columbia when they encountered this Bigfoot and shot him. It's just possible that it was even shot close to that building and fence on the right hand side of the photo, which could be the home of one of the trappers. But the creature in the photo is not the only interesting piece of this conspiracy. There is some writing on the back, which we'll get to in a second. But first, let's talk about the act of getting the photo itself, because this ties into the conspiracy. Taking photos back then meant that a professional photographer had to be involved. He was pretty expensive, and it was not a common thing to do. It wasn't very quick, and the photographer would have to carry around heavy and quite expensive equipment to wherever he was going to be taking the photos at, which just adds to the mystery. That would be the first clue that this is not an ordinary animal. But let's get back to the writing on the reverse side of the photo. It states, quote, "Year 1894, Yalacom River around Liliet, British Columbia. Forestry, Hudson Bay Company." They took the picture, and the guy that was in the picture went and stole them back from the forestry records. Hudson Bay Company. I believe his last name was Holiday. Don't know the first name. Never took all the pictures. Only one. And took pictures of the rest. Glass plate photography. End quote. Now that's a bit to digest. But basically what it says is the photographer took more than one photo of this creature. And in some of the photos, a guy posed with the cryptid. That man's last name was Holiday. The Hudson Bay Company, who had hired this photographer to go to this remote location, which as I previously pointed out, is suspect in itself, would then take all the photos from the photographer and put them away. But this man Holiday was upset about it, and he went to where they had stored them at the forestry records. It's here that he intended to steal the pictures back. What he ended up doing instead was only stealing this one photo, presumably so it wouldn't tip them off. But he then laid out all the other photos on a table and took a picture of them. The last part is key, because that means almost certainly the photographer was the one to steal the photos, since he had taken a camera with him. And that also means he was the one posing with the creature. It is a weird addition to the story that just kind of makes the whole conspiracy that much more confusing. But it comes off like the photographer had taken some extra photos to keep for himself, and the Hudson Bay Company just took them away from him. So he snuck back in to steal them and chickened out and took the one and only grainy photo that we have today. So what happened to the photo after this? Well, that's where the story gets kinda hazy. It's believed that Holiday kept the photo to ensure that it was not destroyed or stolen by the Hudson Bay Company, and at some point, he passed it off to safe hands, someone that would safeguard the secret, but no one's for sure really. He could have just as easily have sold it to someone. But whoever that person was, they end up writing the short story on the back of the photo. The photo was kept hidden after this until 1982, almost a full century after it was taken, when it would finally be made public in a book called The Bigfoot Casebook by Colin and Janet Board. Where the photo was in that time span, and how many times it passed hands, is unknown. But it may as well not been published at all, because it was quickly forgotten. Even among cryptid researchers, it wouldn't resurface again until 2006, when it was posted to cryptomundo.com, and by 2018, it would make an appearance in the book Bigfoot Nation, The History of Sasquatch in North America, by David Hatcher Childress. Now this was my attempt at a very brief summary of this case. If you would like to hear the more in-depth story of this photo, I highly recommend watching the video by YouTuber Bob Gymlan on this case, which I will link in the description below. But as far as believability, at first going into this, I was going to give it a 4. I really believed it, but the more I read into it, the less I believed it. For one thing, the photo quality is so bad. I know it's 1894, but there are other photos from 1894 online that show pretty good quality. Of course, it's been speculated that the photographer intentionally stole the worst photo. Just in case the theft was discovered by the Hudson Bay Company, they would be less likely to pursue any action against him, knowing he took the weakest photo of the bunch. Which brings up the Hudson Bay Company part of this conspiracy. What exactly would prompt them to cover up evidence of a Sasquatch? No one is for sure, but there's 2 general theories. One, that once the men killed the creature, they realized it was more human than ape, which is a recurring theory among cryptid believers, and they panicked and covered it up. The second theory is that the Hudson Bay Company didn't want news of the discovery to spread because they feared the amount of people that might travel to the area to look for the creature could impact the trapping, and they dominated the fur trade and did not want to see that impacted. I guess the main reason I don't really believe it though is if you look at the photo closely, it kinda looks like a wildcat or possibly even a sick bear cub. Because of this, I gotta give it a 2. Smallville cancellation due to cult theory. Smallville was a show on the CW that ran for a total of 10 seasons and 217 episodes. The series followed the teenage Clark Kent in his hometown of Smallville. By the end of its run, it would go down as the longest running science fiction television show in history. The ratings were always strong, peaking at 6.3 million in season 2. But near the end of the run, the ratings would start to decline, and the CW decided to wrap things up by season 10. However, an actress on the show named Allison Mack, who played the character Chloe Sullivan, would get into some legal trouble. Some dark legal trouble. Apparently in 2006, Mack would join a cult/pyramid scheme called NXIVM that would eventually be implicated in crimes ranging from sex trafficking to forced labor. The cult's leader was Keith Raniere, who would eventually be labeled as a sex offender. He was able to attract not only actress Mack, but also some children of rich and powerful families. One of these was Seagram-era's Claire Bronfman, who along with Mack would be arrested in 2018. Mack was one of the top members of the cult, and she played a pivotal role in recruiting young women under the guise of female mentorship, a place supposedly to help young women in self-improvement and to have a healthier mindset. But Mack was really recruiting young women to have sex with the cult leader, Keith Raniere, and she would even sometimes starve the young women in an attempt to get them to fit what Raniere considered to be the ideal female figure. She also forced the women to record false confessions along with taking nude pictures as a way to blackmail them later on. And finally, some of the women were branded. Like I said, this is some dark stuff. So you're probably wondering, how does this tie in with the cancellation of Smallville, which went off the air a full 7 years before Mack was arrested? I mean, she did join a cult in 2006, but it wasn't even investigated until 2017. So what gives? I have to confess, I can't find much about this conspiracy. Maybe I'm looking in the wrong places, but I can't even find any discussion about it. Of course, maybe the CW had any talk of it removed, but I doubt it. I would hate to think that the CW and the creators of Smallville knew what was going on, and not one CEO, director, producer, actor, actress, set designer, cameraman, or anyone on set would know what was going on and just remain silent about it, and instead just cancel the show in hopes that they would not be linked to the cover-up. I mean, if the show had been fairly new when it was canceled, I would go along with this one. But the show had ran 10 seasons, and some fans say it ran too long. It was out of steam, and I don't think the cancellation had anything to do with the cult. I'd give it a 1. Winona Ryder Studio Sabotage Conspiracy. In the late 80s, Godfather 3 and Goodfellas were being filmed at the same time. Winona Ryder was slated to play Michael Corleone's daughter in Godfather, but she had to drop out due to nervous exhaustion. She would end up being replaced by Sofia Coppola, whose performance would be widely panned, and is often blamed for the film not earning as much as the rest of the series. The theory states that WB did not want Godfather 3 to overshadow Goodfellas, so they were somehow able to contribute to Winona Ryder getting sick and/or exhausted. This is another one that I just can't seem to find any data or discussion on. I do think sometimes when a movie this big fails to deliver, that people try to come up with a conspiracy to blame it on, instead of just saying this movie sucked. So I'm going to give it a 1 and move on, because I'm not a movie fan. Unless it's The Princess Bride, which was the best movie ever made. Loggers kill zoologist conspiracy. I'm sorry to have to say this again, but it's another one that I just can't find anything on. Even the author of the Iceberg doesn't explain it or source its reference. So I'm not sure if this is talking about one certain event, or if there's an overall conspiracy of loggers killing zoologists. I just don't know enough to speculate about it. So I'm going to have to score it non-applicable. If anyone listening knows what this is about, please let us know in the comment section below. 2016 coup attempt conspiracy. And another theory that I really don't want to touch for obvious reasons, but it basically alleges that there was an attempt to get the Electoral College members to change their vote away from Trump. They did this supposedly with bribes and threats. You can make your own mind up on this one. U.S. Navy encountered unknown animals in the Congo conspiracy. According to the aforementioned CryptoMundo.com, there were reports that a U.S. Navy SEAL unit encountered a group of strange apes in the Democratic Republic of Congo between 1997 and 2002. The story goes as follows, quote, "What the former SEAL relates is that he was involved in covert operations in the Democratic Republic of Congo between 1997 and 2002. According to his account, his team observed a group of 13 chimpanzee-like creatures between 4.5 to 5 feet tall, uniformly gray all over their bodies, with rows of seemingly porcupine-like quills running the length of their backs. The unidentified apes walked bipedally and were observed by the SEAL team in the act of killing another animal. When the creatures became excited or agitated, the quills or spines stood erect from their bodies. According to this informant, the U.S. Navy SEAL team took 3 minutes of video footage of these creatures, but this tape apparently has been classified due to their mission," end quote. The article would go on to state that due to the soldier working in intelligence gathering, he could not reveal his identity. The account is not as crazy as it first sounds, as the sightings go back decades. In 1961, animal collector Charles Cordier would report that he followed small tracks of a creature the locals called Kankundakar, which is described as a child-sized hairy biped with a mane of long red hair. There's also reports from Madagascar about a short water-dwelling bipedal scruffy-haired hominid called a Kalonaro. It is believed that the Navy SEALs seen one of these two creatures, or saw something that was related to one of them. Considering this story comes from one source, and that source has to use the story of one Navy SEAL who refuses to release his identity, well, there's not much evidence for this one. I gotta give it a 1. Japanese interference in the American Civil War conspiracy. In a rather famous story from 1853, American Commodore Matthew Perry successfully negotiated a deal with the Tokugawa shogunate to open up Japan for trade with foreigners, particularly trade with the Western powers. And by negotiated, I mean he told Japan to open up for trade or else. The shogunate, who was the military leader and answered to the emperor, would accept, because he knew that Japan was in no shape militarily to stop the Westerners from invading if they so chose, and it was the first time in over 200 years that Japan would have any dealings with foreigners. The decision with the daimyos, who were the feudal lords in Japan, was not met with a lot of excitement and happiness. They much preferred Japan to be closed off from the rest of the world, but the decision was backed by about half of them, and things were okay for a while. But about a decade later, in 1863, many more of the feudal lords became unhappy with the policy, as well as unhappy with the shogunate. They despised the openness with the West. At this point, the Japanese emperor would decide to step in. That April, Emperor Komei issued an order to all Japanese daimyos to expel the outsiders that were exerting influence on Japanese society. This included the Americans. By June, the Japanese were using the Western-built armaments to attack foreign vessels, and on June 25th, the Japanese attacked the SS Pembroke, a merchant ship, in the Shimonoseki Strait. The Pembroke barely escaped with light damage. The U.S. Navy, in response, sent the USS Wyoming 2 weeks later, and if you're not familiar with U.S. history, it should be mentioned here. The U.S. was in its third year of a brutal civil war. The USS Wyoming had actually been in the Pacific, hunting for a Confederate ship called the CSS Alabama. It would break this off and head to Japan. When it arrived, the Japanese coastal defenses were ready and opened up on the ship. The Wyoming then went after the American-built ships that sat in the strait. This one ship would destroy 2 of the largest Japanese vessels, inflicted damage to the coastal defenses, and even shelled a nearby town. After an hour and a half, it was over. The Wyoming was heavily damaged, but only took light casualties. But it was nowhere near the damage that the Wyoming had inflicted. Although Japan would attempt to shell other Western ships after this, the writing was on the wall. By 1864, Japan would become allies of the Americans, French, Dutch, and British, and they would help the shogunate enforce their rule over the daimyos. And finally, the theory states that some Japanese citizens fought for the Confederacy, but according to the Gettysburg U.S. National Park Service Handbook, 2 Japanese soldiers did fight in the Civil War. However, they fought for the North. Regardless, there's still enough proof in this one to prove the conspiracy did happen, so I'll give it a 5. Because Japan did technically try to interfere during the US Civil War. Thankfully after this, US-Japanese relations would never suffer again. 1901 Everest Expedition Conspiracy. The first official recorded expedition to reach the peak of Mount Everest came in 1922, when a British party of mountaineers would make the attempt. The expedition failed to reach the top, but it still made history as being the first try. Or was it? According to this theory, when the British team went up in 1922, they would come across some items along the way that showed a previous attempt had been made. Judging by the notes and the clothing, they guessed that it occurred sometime in 1901. The adventurers were stunned, because no one had heard of this before, and there was no one that had came back from the expedition to document the journey. So it's unknown what happened to this expedition, and to these people, assuming that it did happen. This has led to the theory that the whole party was killed by a Yeti. Even if the Yeti part of the story is false, Mount Everest is dangerous enough to kill someone anyways. The possibility that someone had tried to reach the peak of Mount Everest in 1901 would flip the climbing world upside down. The 1922 attempt only came about because it was the first time climbers tried using bottled oxygen along the way. If someone attempted to climb to the top in 1901 without bottled oxygen, it would definitely have been a suicide mission. But considering there's little proof of this, no pictures, no documents, just rumors and hearsay, I gotta give it a 2. I want to give it a 1, but I guess it's impossible to say for sure that some party didn't try to climb to the top before. German TV alien hijack conspiracy. This next theory comes from a 2022 Reddit post from the Unsolved Mystery sub that has since been removed, that claimed on November 7th, 2004 on German TV, during a commercial break, the picture suddenly went static, and for a short while, this played a bizarre clip of an alien-like figure. The incident was said to have been both terrifying and weird by those who viewed it. According to various retellings, the most widely agreed version of events goes as follows. During a commercial break for the car brand Mini, the picture goes to static for 30 seconds, and then a greenish-looking alien either standing or sitting behind a desk. The alien proceeds to say something. Some witnesses state that there might have been a microphone, and he was reading off a piece of paper. The alien looks to the left, and then back to the camera, seemingly confused. The picture goes static again for a few seconds, and the commercial continues to play like normal. The next day, a late-night comedy talk show called TV Total would discuss the event, and the host said, quote, "Yeah guys, it's a pirate advertisement for Halo 2. All good," end quote. They would rerun the clip, but this time, when they reran the clip, they ran something completely different. The quality was much better, and it didn't look like anything from the original video that people described. This version has since been uploaded to YouTube, and we'll view a few seconds of it here. But the original one, the one that numerous witnesses have stated to have seen, has never been found. So what do I give this one? I gotta go with a 4 here. I don't necessarily believe that a real alien hijacked the channel, but there was a real documented commercial, and it was witnessed by many. But the question is, was there 2 separate commercials? Or could it be that people are just misremembering? Or could the television station have aired a different version the first time and received too much backlash, then chose to remove it in favor of a slightly less aggressive commercial? Or maybe the whole thing was real, and the German government is trying to cover it up. It's hard to say. Iki Ningyo Footage conspiracy. The Iki Ningyo Footage is an alleged video of a statue Mary crying tears of blood in Japan. According to the theory, it's one of the few, if not only, cases that the Catholic Church was unable to debunk, despite numerous investigations. The video, however, is lost. The story goes back to June 12, 1973, when Sister Agnes Katsuko Sasagawa was at the chapel of her convent. She would notice a brilliant light shining from the place on the altar where the Eucharist elements were. She reported seeing a fine mist surrounding the altar, and quote, "a multitude of beings similar to angels who surrounded the altar in adoration," end quote. She would claim later that month An angel began to meet and pray with her. But that wasn't all. Sister Agnes would begin to develop stigmata, which is wounds resembling the wounds Jesus suffered during the crucifixion. The wound was in the shape of a cross, and it began to bleed. Odd things like this would continue to happen over the summer, and by August of that year, witnesses would report that the statue began to sweat. But the real surprise was yet to come. Over a year later, on January 4th, 1975, the statue would begin to weep, and it drew so much attention in Japan that by December 8th, 1979, it would be broadcast on national television, and by September 1981, the statue would cry one last time, for a total of 101 times. The tears would be tested, and it was found to be human. The blood was found to be type A, and the tears were AB. This conspiracy is a little tricky to judge. I'm not sure if the author of the Iceberg was questioning the crying statue, or questioning what happened to the footage that disappeared. Both are interesting. According to skeptics, making these crying statues are fairly easy. The Catholic Church actually investigates these claims, and it shoots them down as hoaxes. That's kind of where this one ties in, because supposedly, this is the only one they couldn't prove was a hoax. But I think I will give this one a 2, just because from my research, these crying statues are easily faked, and if the Catholic Church is shooting down the vast majority of them, then there's no reason to believe it's real. As far as the footage that supposedly disappeared, it's more likely the Catholic Church came into possession of it, or they asked Japan not to publicly show the footage anymore. 4chan predicted Epstein's death conspiracy. Less than 1 hour before the first news report surfaced online that Jeffrey Epstein had been found unresponsive in his jail cell, a post about his death mysteriously appeared on a 4chan message board. ABC News reporter Aaron Katursky was the first official news member to tweet about the death, but 38 minutes before he did, the post was already active on 4chan. The post said, quote, "Don't ask me how I know, but Epstein died an hour ago from hanging. Cardiac arrest. Screen cap this." End quote. The text was accompanied by an image of Pepe the Frog. The post certainly did not seem to be trolling, and authorities would look into it. The New York Fire Department thought an employee could have posted the news, but after an investigation, they determined that it did not come from the fire department. Adding more legitimacy to the post was the poster's reply to other 4chaners who didn't believe him. He would add more information, such as a breakdown of the procedures used to resuscitate Epstein, which suggested that the poster may have been a first responder, which of course would be a violation of federal health privacy laws. In total, the user made 6 posts, one that claimed they tried to resuscitate him for 40 minutes before he was transported to the hospital, at which point medical personnel tried to revive him for another 20 minutes. Those details are partially consistent with the information that the Federal Bureau of Prisons released about Epstein's death. To this day, no one knows who posted it. There is a small possibility that the person was trolling, as posters throw random posts on the ode message board 24 hours a day. At some point, one is bound to be true, but I think it's highly unlikely. I think it was a legit post from someone on the scene, and for that reason, I'm giving it a 5. Yura Yesusov conspiracy. This one, well, it's kind of a confusing one, and there's very little info, which ties directly into the conspiracy itself. Yura Yesusov is an alleged serial killer operating in Russia. He is supposedly connected to online video blogs and those Myers-Briggs 16 personality tests. He actually used to have a profile on personalitydatabase.com, but it is now inactive. He is also listed on personalitylist.com under the criminal category. His description goes as follows, quote, "Russian trash blogger, known for his love video for Krasnodar anarchist movement, the Obsession with Dazai series, and the Ultimate Frog video. All activity is deleted at this moment, but found some acceptance on 2chan and 0chan, end quote. So the conspiracy itself says this guy is some sort of uncaptured serial killer in Russia, and had a social media presence online at some point, but now most of that is gone, which implies that he had to delete it all and go underground. Adding more weirdness to this theory is supposedly people that have posted questions online about this individual have been surprised to see their post deleted almost immediately. I did test this part of the theory, as I made a post on 4chan's paranormal board asking about the alleged killer, and the thread was not deleted, so it seems like that part of the legend is false at least. The fact that everything online about this guy has disappeared, well, it's supposed to be proof that this was a legit wanted serial killer who had to scrub his presence and vanish. But I tend to agree with the other theory, that this is some kind of different take on the creepypasta. The whole story was made up by some clever person or persons who just wanted to try and troll some mystery and paranormal forums. For that, I gotta say this one gets a score of 1. Hollywood Studios funded Dominican gang wars conspiracy. I'm sorry to have to do this again, but this is another one that just doesn't have any info available. Or at least, none that I can find. Even the author of the Iceberg offers no details surrounding the theory. So if anybody out there knows, feel free to leave it in the comments. I'm going to give this one a non-applicable score. African colonization of Central America conspiracy. So this theory looks at the premise that colonization of the Americas was actually started by the people from Africa. The main evidence that this theory is based on comes from the Olmec culture. The Olmecs existed in what is now southern Mexico from roughly 1200 BC to 400 BC. The idea that they were related to Africans came about after the discovery of the colossal heads at Tres Zapotes in 1862. The heads date from at least 900 BC and are a distinct feature of the Olmec civilization. The stones all portray mature individuals with fleshy cheeks, flat noses, and slightly crossed eyes. Their physical characteristics correspond to a type that is common among the inhabitants of Tabasco and Veracruz. The backs of the heads are often flat. The thought is the monuments represent portraits of powerful rulers, but believers of this conspiracy think the heads look more like African rulers instead of people from Central America. In addition, is the linguistic, religious, and cultural similarities, which they are said to share many. Other supposed evidence is the Mesoamerican pyramids, calendar technology, mummification, and mythology that all can be traced back to the arrival of Africans who sailed the currents running from Western Africa to the Americas. It's even suggested the Aztec god Quetzalcoatl was a representation of an African visitor, while Mayan sources also describe what some consider to be visits to the New World by a fleet from the Malay Empire in 1311, led by Abu Bakr II, and according to Christopher Columbus's own journal, the purpose of the third voyage was to test the claims of King John II of Portugal that, quote, canoes had been found set out from the coast of West Africa and sailed to the west with merchandise, and secondly, to investigate the claims of the native inhabitants of Hispaniola that said there had come to Hispaniola from the south and southeast a black people who have the tops of their spears made of a metal which they call guanin, end quote. So there's actually a lot of circumstantial evidence that this one is true. Like I mentioned with the Romans and the Americas theory, I think there was a lot more travel going on back then than we know about, and it wouldn't surprise me in the least if this theory was true. But like with the Roman one, I have to give it a 3, because the evidence just isn't strong enough for me. Now, do I think Africans could have visited Central America before Columbus? Absolutely. But colonization? Well, that needs more proof. That is all for episode 2 of the Most Obscure Conspiracy Theories Iceberg. I hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching.